One queen dowager was so involved in her son's marriage that he and his wife reportedly had to use secret passages to find private moments together. Another formidable woman, a senatrix in Rome, was accused of having her enemies, including a pope, strangled, and she even installed her own son onto the papal throne. There was an empress whose conflicts with her daughter-in-law over power became so intense they contributed to political instability in the empire. A powerful queen advised her royal son to keep his own dynamic wife at arm's length, never sharing his deepest secrets with her. And then there was the grandmother of a king who, disapproving of his young wife, saw to it that the marriage was annulled and the girl banished. Number 10. Empress Matilda, the imperial mother who gave chilling advice. Empress Matilda, also known as Maud, was the daughter of King Henry I of England. She was once Empress of the Holy Roman Empire through her first marriage, and then fought a long war for the English throne herself. Her son, Henry II, eventually became King of England in 1154, uniting England and vast territories in France. In 1152, 2 years before becoming king, but already a powerful duke, Henry married Eleanor of Aquitaine, a recent divorcee of the King of France and a duchess in her own right. Matilda, a woman forged in power, struggles, and war, was still very much alive and influential during the early years of her son's reign and marriage. Matilda was known for her strong will and determination. She had faced down armies and schemed against powerful men her whole life. When her son Henry took Eleanor as his wife, a woman who was herself no stranger to power and political maneuvering, Matilda had opinions. She had spent years in Normandy, advising her son, and continued to do so even after he became king. Chroniclers of the time noted her counsel. One such writer, Ralph de Desato, recorded that Matilda gave specific advice to Henry regarding Eleanor. She reportedly told him not to make Eleanor his intimate companion. More than that, she advised him to never reveal his innermost secrets or plans to his wife. Matilda's reasoning, according to Desato, was based on her own father's experiences and those of other kings, suggesting that wives could be security risks or untrustworthy with state secrets. This advice, coming from a powerful mother to her newly powerful son about his equally formidable wife, hints at a desire to maintain her own influence and perhaps a suspicion of Eleanor's independent spirit. Matilda also supposedly counseled Henry to be frequently seen in public by his subjects, but to make himself difficult to access in private, fostering an air of majesty and distance. While Matilda lived mainly in Normandy, and Eleanor was often with Henry across their vast domains, Matilda's counsel would have hung in the air, potentially shaping how Henry approached his relationship with his queen. Eleanor, who had her own ambitions and political acumen, would have been aware of her mother-in-law's influence over the king. Matilda passed away in 1167, 13 years into Henry and Eleanor's often turbulent marriage. Number 9. Marozia, the Roman matriarch who played popes and puppets. In the early 10th century, Rome was a chaotic place, and one woman, Marozia, rose to become one of its most powerful figures. She was born into a noble Roman family, the Theophylacti, who held immense sway over the city and the papacy. This era is sometimes called the Saeculum Obscurum, or Dark Age, for the papacy, and Marozia was right at the heart of it. She held the titles of Senatrix and Patricia of Rome, indicating her high status and power. Marozia had a series of influential husbands and lovers, including, it was rumored, Pope Sergius III. One of her sons from her first marriage, or possibly from her alleged relationship with Sergius III, was John, who she would later install as Pope John XI. Marozia's influence was such that she effectively controlled papal elections for a period. She was a key player in what became known as the pornocracy, or the rule of the harlots, a term coined by later hostile critics to describe the period of female influence over the papacy, to figures like Marozia and her mother, Theodora. Facts about her personal dealings with her children's spouses are intertwined with her larger political machinations. Her son, Alberic II of Spoleto, from her marriage to Alberic I, Duke of Spoleto, would eventually overthrow her. Alberic II married Alda of Provence, the daughter of King Hugh of Italy, who was also Marozia's third husband, and thus Alberic II's stepfather. This made Alda Marozia's step-granddaughter-in-law in a twisted family tree. Before Alberic II's rise, Marozia's power was nearly absolute in Rome. She is said to have ordered the imprisonment and possible murder of Pope John X, who had been an ally of her mother but later became Marozia's rival. When Marozia married her third husband Hugh of Italy in Rome in 932, her son Alberic II, perhaps fearing his own marginalization or disgusted by his mother's actions, led an uprising. The Roman people, tired of outside rulers and Marozia's dominance, supported Alberic. Hugh of Italy fled the city. Marozia was captured by her own son, Alberic II, and imprisoned. She remained in captivity for the rest of her life, dying in a convent sometime after 937. Her son, Pope John XI, was also kept under Alberic II's control. While direct accounts of her day-to-day interactions as a mother-in-law to someone like Alda of Provence are scarce amidst the grand political drama, Marozia's reputation for ruthlessness, her control over her children's lives, making one a popal, for example, and her dramatic downfall at the hands of her own son paint a picture of a matriarch, whose family-renowned own son paint a picture of a matriarch. Number 8. Eadgifu of Kent, the grandmother-in-law, who broke a royal marriage. Eadgifu of Kent was a significant figure in 10th century England. She was the third wife of King Edward, the elder son of Alfred the Great. As queen, and later as Queen Dowager, she wielded considerable influence and controlled large estates. She was the mother of two kings, Edmund I and Edred, and grandmother to two more, Edrig and Edgar the Peaceful. Eadgifu was known for her piety and her support for monastic reform, but she was also a political player who fiercely guarded her family's interests and her own position. Her story as a formidable in-law figure comes to a head with her grandson, King Eadwig. Eadwig became king in 955 at a very young age, perhaps around 15. Soon after, or possibly even before his coronation, he married a noble woman named Eadgifu. Some sources suggest Eadgifu and her mother, Eadgifu, were ambitious and sought to dominate the young king. The problem for Eadgifu was that she ran afoul of powerful figures at court, including the influential churchman, Dunstan, and it seems her husband's own grandmother, Eadgifu. One famous, though possibly embellished story from Eadwig's coronation feast recounts how the young king left the celebrations to be with Eadgifu and her mother. Archbishop Oda and Dunstan, angered by his departure, allegedly dragged him back to the feast. More concretely, Eadgifu of Kent seems to have strongly disapproved of Eadwig's relationship with Eadgifu. In 957 or 958, Archbishop Oda, a close ally of Eadgifu and Dunstan, annulled Eadwig's marriage to Eadgifu. The official grounds given were that they were too closely related, within the prohibited degrees of consanguinity. This was a common reason used to dissolve politically inconvenient marriages in the medieval period. Following the annulment, Eadgifu was reportedly exiled, possibly to Ireland, and some accounts even claim she was brutally maimed on the orders of Archbishop Oda, though this is debated by historians. Eadgifu of Kent's own lands had been confiscated by her grandson, Eadwig, early in his reign, perhaps because he saw her as a threat, or because he was influenced by Eadgifu and her mother. When Eadwig's brother Edgar took control of Mercia and Northumbria in 957, effectively splitting the kingdom, Eadgifu's lands were restored to her in the territories Edgar controlled. After Eadwig died young in 959 and Edgar became king of all England, Eadgifu remained a powerful and respected figure. The swift and decisive end to Edwig's marriage to Eadgifu, however, strongly suggests the hand of powerful opponents, with the Queen Dowager Eadgifu likely being a key player in the background, protecting what she saw as the integrity and stability of the royal line and her own influence. Number 7. Melisende of Jerusalem. The queen who clashed with her son and his bride. Melisende was Queen of Jerusalem from 1131 to 1153, ruling jointly with her husband Fulk and then with her son Baldwin III. Born a princess of Jerusalem, she inherited the throne from her father, Baldwin II, who made it clear she was to rule as queen regnant, not merely as a consort. When her husband Fulk died in a hunting accident in 1143, Melisende continued to rule, now alongside her young son Baldwin III, who was just 13. For several years, Melisende was the dominant force in the kingdom. She was a patron of the arts and the church, and a skilled politician who knew how to maintain power in the complex Crusader state. As Baldwin III grew older, he naturally wanted to assert his own authority. Melisende, however, was reluctant to cede power. This led to increasing tension between mother and son. In 1150, when Baldwin III was 20, he demanded a formal division of power, but Melisende resisted. The conflict escalated, and by 1152, it was near civil war. Baldwin III accused his mother of clinging to power and confining him. He appealed to the Haute Cour, the feudal council of the kingdom, which eventually decided to divide the kingdom between them. Baldwin received the richer northern parts, including Acre and Tyre, while Melisende retained Jerusalem and Nablus in the south. This arrangement didn't last. Baldwin, still dissatisfied, marched on Jerusalem, and Melisende was besieged in the Tower of David. She eventually surrendered, and Baldwin III became the sole effective ruler, though Melisende retained Nablus and a certain degree of influence. It was into this tense family dynamic that Baldwin III's wife, Theodora Comnena, arrived. Theodora was a Byzantine princess, niece of the Emperor Manuel I Komnenos. The marriage took place in 1158, several years after the main power struggle between Baldwin and Melisende had been resolved in Baldwin's favor. Melisende was still alive and a respected figure, but her direct political control was diminished. However, The shadow of her previous dominance and her strong personality would have been present. Theodora was only about 13 at the time of her marriage. While specific accounts of direct conflict between Melisende and her young daughter-in-law Theodora are not prominent, Melisende's earlier unwillingness to relinquish power to her own son suggests she would have been a formidable presence for any young queen. Melisende had shown she was not one to step aside quietly. She had built a strong network of supporters and was deeply embedded in the political and religious life of Jerusalem. Any new queen, especially one from a foreign land like Theodora, would have had to navigate this carefully. Melisende passed away in 1161, just 3 years after Theodora's arrival. Baldwin III himself died young in 1163, and Theodora, still a teenager, was left a widow. Number 6. Galla Placidia, the empress who saw her daughter-in-law twice widowed. Galla Placidia was one of the most remarkable women of the late Roman Empire, living a life of extraordinary drama in the tumultuous 5th century. She was the daughter of Emperor Theodosius, the first half-sister to Emperors Honorius and Arcadius, and was captured by the Visigoths when they sacked Rome in 410. She later married the Visigothic king Athalf, and after his death was returned to the Romans and married the general Constantius III, who became co-emperor. Her son from this marriage, Valentinian III, became Western Roman emperor in 425 at the age of 6. Galla Placidia served as regent for her young son, effectively ruling the Western Roman Empire for many years. She was a devout Christian, a builder of churches, and a shrewd political operator in an era of constant crisis. Valentinian III was betrothed in childhood to Licinia Eudoxia, the daughter of his cousin Theodosius II, the Eastern Roman emperor. The marriage took place in Constantinople in 437, when Valentinian was 18 and Eudoxia was about 15. They returned to Ravenna, the western capital, and Eudoxia was granted the title of Augusta. Galla Placidia, though no longer regent in name, remained a powerful influence over her son and the court. She had guided the empire through treacherous times, dealing with powerful generals like Aegeus and Boniface. A woman of such experience and authority would naturally cast a long shadow over the imperial household, including her young daughter-in-law. The relationship between Placidia and Eudoxia is not detailed in terms of personal conflict in the sources, but Placidia's dominance in political and family matters was clear. She had arranged her son's marriage, a key dynastic alliance. Eudoxia bore Valentinian 2 daughters, Eudocia and Placidia. The life of an empress was often constrained, and Eudoxia would have been under the eye of her very experienced mother-in-law. Galla Placidia died in 450. Her son Valentinian III, however, proved to be a less capable ruler without her guidance. In 454, he foolishly murdered his most competent general, Aetius. The following year, 455, Valentinian III himself was assassinated by supporters of Aetius. Licinia Eudoxia was now a widow. In the chaos that followed, a senator named Petronius Maximus seized the throne and, to legitimize his rule, forced Eudoxia to marry him. Her elder daughter, Eudocia, was also forced to marry Petronius's son. Eudoxia, in desperation, allegedly appealed to Gaiseric, king of the Vandals, for help. The Vandals sailed to Italy and sacked Rome in 455. Petronius Maximus was killed trying to flee. Gaiseric took Licinia Eudoxia and her daughters, Eudocia and Placidia, captive to Carthage. While Galla Placidia was not alive to witness these later tragedies, her life shows the immense power a mother could wield in the imperial family, shaping the destiny of her son, and by extension, his wife. Eudoxia's life, caught in the violent politics of the era, gusked the perilous position of imperial women. Number 5. Adelaide of Italy, the empress who clashed with her daughter-in-law over an empire. Adelaide of Italy, also known as Saint Adelaide, was a powerful and influential figure in 10th century Europe. Born into Burgundian royalty, she became Queen of Italy. After her first husband's death and subsequent imprisonment by a rival, she was rescued by Otto the Great, King of Germany. She married Otto in 951, becoming Queen of Germany, and in 962 she was crowned Holy Roman Empress alongside him in Rome. Adelaide was known for her piety, her charitable works, and her political acumen, often acting as regent for Otto when he was away on campaign. She was a key supporter of the Cluniac monastic reforms. Her son, Otto II, succeeded his father as Holy Roman Emperor in 973. In 972, just before his father's death, Otto II married Theophanu, a Byzantine princess, possibly a niece or grandniece of the Byzantine Emperor John I Thimiskes. This marriage was a major diplomatic achievement, intended to link the two empires. Theophanu was young, probably around 16, highly educated, and accustomed to the sophisticated Byzantine court. Adelaide, now the Empress Dowager, initially had a good relationship with her son and daughter-in-law. However, tensions soon arose. Adelaide was a very established figure, with her own power base and supporters, particularly in Italy. Theophanu. As the new empress naturally wanted to assert her own influence and promote her own circle, which sometimes clashed with Adelaide's established networks and perhaps her more traditional ways. Sources suggest that Otto II began to favor his wife, Theophanu's counsel, over his mother's. This led to a growing estrangement between Adelaide and her son. By 978, the situation had deteriorated to the point where Adelaide felt compelled to leave the imperial court and retire to Burgundy, and later to Italy. She felt marginalized and stripped of her honors by her son, allegedly at the instigation of Theophanu and some of Otto II's courtiers, who saw Adelaide's influence as too great. Otto II died unexpectedly in 983, leaving his 3-year-old son, Otto III, as heir. This crisis brought Adelaide and Theophanu back together, at least initially. Theophanu became regent for her young son, and Adelaide supported her claim against rivals, like Henry the Quarrelsome, Duke of Bavaria. However, the two empresses, both strong-willed women, soon found themselves in conflict again over the control of the regency. Theophanu, as the boy's mother, ultimately secured the primary role as regent, and Adelaide once more withdrew from the main levers of power, though she remained influential in Italy. Theophanu proved to be a capable ruler, but she died relatively young in 991. After Theophanu's death, Adelaide was recalled to become regent for her grandson Otto III, a role she fulfilled until he came of age in 994. The relationship between Adelaide and Theophanu was complex, marked by periods of cooperation driven by necessity, but also by significant rivalry over power and influence within the imperial family and the empire itself. Number 4. Fredegund, the Merovingian queen of many murders. Fredegund was a queen of Neustria, one of the Frankish kingdoms, in the late 6th century. She started as a palace servant and became the mistress and then the wife of King Chilperic I. Her story, mostly told by Gregory of Tours, who was not her biggest fan, is filled with violence, intrigue, and a relentless pursuit of power for herself and her children. She is accused of orchestrating the murders of Chilperic's previous wife, Galswintha, sister of Brunhilde, Queen of Austrasia, and his earlier repudiated wife, Audovera, along with Audovera's sons. This ignited a bitter feud with Brunhilde that lasted for decades and consumed the Merovingian kingdoms. As a mother, Fredegund was fiercely protective of her own son, Clothar II, who was born late in her life after several other children had died young. When Chilperic I was assassinated in 584, Clothar II was only an infant. Fredegund acted as regent for him, skillfully navigating treacherous political waters, forming alliances and fighting off enemies, including Brunhilde and her descendants. Her ruthlessness was legendary. Gregory of Tours recounts numerous instances where Fredegund allegedly used poison, daggers, and deceit to eliminate rivals, disloyal nobles, and even clergy who opposed her. She sent assassins after Brunhilde and Brunhilde's son, King Childebert II. She was also accused of trying to murder her own daughter, Rigonth, over a dispute about treasure. Given her reputation and her methods, Fredegund would have been a terrifying mother-in-law, though specific accounts of her interactions with Clothar II's wives are less detailed than her grander political schemes. Clothar II eventually had 3 known wives: Haldetrude, Bertitrude, and Sichilde. His first marriage to Haldetrude likely occurred after Fredegund's death in 597, or very close to it, as Clothar was still young. However, Fredegund's shadow would have loomed large. She had secured his throne through extreme measures. Any woman marrying into that family would have been acutely aware of the matriarch who had cleared the path for her son with such brutality. Fredegund's legacy was one of fear and power. She trained Clothar II in her ruthless school of politics. While she might not have directly interfered in his marriages in the way some other mothers-in-law did, her entire life was about controlling the destiny of her lineage, and she would have undoubtedly viewed her son's spouse through the lens of political advantage and loyalty. Any misstep by a daughter-in-law in such an environment could have had dire consequences, even if Fredegund was no longer alive to personally deliver them, as her influence and the culture of the court she shaped would persist. Number 3. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen who knew how to keep daughters-in-law in check. Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most powerful and influential women of the High Middle Ages. Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, she was Queen Consort of France through her marriage to Louis VII, and then Queen Consort of England through her marriage to Henry II. She participated in the Second Crusade, patronized poets, and was a central figure in the politics of Western Europe for decades. She was the mother of 2 English kings, Richard I, the Lionheart, and John. Eleanor was known for her strong will, intelligence, and longevity, outliving most of her children. Her relationships with her daughters-in-law were often shaped by political necessity and her own efforts to maintain influence and protect her son's interests, as well as her own. For her son Richard I, Eleanor played a crucial role in securing his bride, Berengaria of Navarre. Richard was betrothed to Alice of France, sister of King Philip II, but had long delayed the marriage, possibly due to rumors that Alice had been his own father, Henry II's mistress. While Richard was on the Third Crusade, the 70-year-old Eleanor journeyed to Navarre to fetch Berengaria, and then escorted her to Sicily to meet Richard. Richard and Berengaria were married in Cyprus in 1191. Berengaria, however, spent very little time with Richard, who was often on crusade or fighting in France. She never even set foot in England during Richard's lifetime. Eleanor, as Queen Mother, remained the dominant female figure in the Angevin Empire. Berengaria was left in a somewhat isolated position, though Eleanor seems to have treated her fairly, ensuring her dower rights after Richard's death. Eleanor's relationship with her youngest son, John's second wife, Isabella of Angoulême, was more complex. John divorced his first wife, Isabella of Gloucester, and married the very young Isabella of Angoulême in 1200. Eleanor was still alive and politically active. Isabella of Angoulême was a prize heiress to a strategic county, but her marriage to John sparked a war with the Lusignan family, to whom she had been betrothed. Eleanor actively campaigned with John in France and managed her own duchy of Aquitaine. When John was losing Normandy and other French territories, Eleanor's support was crucial. After John's death in 1216, Eleanor had already passed away in 1204. However, if we consider Eleanor's general approach, she was a pragmatist. She had even imprisoned her own son Henry, the young king's wife Margaret of France, for a time when Henry rebelled against his father. And earlier, as mentioned with Empress Matilda, there's the story of Matilda advising Henry II to be wary of Eleanor herself. Eleanor, having experienced such counsel, might have applied similar caution or control in her dealings with her own son's wives, always boditizing the stability and power of her dynasty. Her long and active life meant she was a constant, powerful presence in the lives of her children and their spouses. Number 2. Isabeau of Bavaria, the queen accused of debauchery and neglect. Isabeau of Bavaria became Queen of France upon her marriage to King Charles VI in 1385. Initially, their marriage seemed promising, but Charles VI soon began to suffer from bouts of severe mental illness, starting in 1392. These episodes, which included delusions and violent rages, left him incapacitated for long periods, creating a power vacuum in France. Isabeau found herself in a difficult position, caught between powerful factions of royal dukes like Burgundy and Orleans, vying for control of the government. Over time, Isabeau became a significant political player herself, though her reputation suffered greatly both during her lifetime and in historical accounts. She was accused by her enemies, particularly the Burgundian faction, of extravagance, licentiousness, and neglecting her husband and children. Rumors swirled about her alleged affairs, including with Charles VI's brother Louis, Duke of Orleans. These accusations were politically motivated, aimed at discrediting her and the Armagnac faction she sometimes aligned with fire. Whether true or not, the image of a queen indulging in lavish parties and personal pleasures while the king was ill and the kingdom was in turmoil, including the ongoing 100 Years' War with England, took hold. She was criticized for her spending on luxuries and for her political maneuvering, which sometimes involved switching allegiances. As a mother-in-law, her actions were deeply intertwined with the fate of France. Her son, the Dauphin Charles, later Charles VII, had a strained relationship with her. Isabeau, under pressure from the Burgundians who had captured Paris, consented to the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. This treaty disinherited her own son, the Dauphin Charles, and declared Henry V of England as the heir to the French throne. The treaty also arranged for the marriage of Isabeau's daughter, Catherine of Valois, to Henry V. So Isabeau effectively made the English king her son-in-law and future king of France at the expense of her own son. The Dauphin Charles of course rejected this treaty and continued the fight for his crown, eventually succeeding with the help of figures like Joan of Arc. His wife was Mary of Anjou, whom he married in 1422. Isabeau's relationship with Mary of Anjou would have been overshadowed by her disinheritance of Charles. Isabeau lived in English-controlled Paris, largely isolated from her son Charles VII and his court. Her actions, driven by the chaotic politics and her own precarious situation, led to her being vilified as a wicked queen who betrayed her country and her son. Her daughters-in-law, like Jacqueline, Countess of Hainaut, briefly married to Isabeau's son John, Duke of Touraine, and sons-in-law, like Henry V, found themselves enmeshed in a family drama that was tearing France apart, with Isabeau at its controversial center. She died in 1435, largely unmourned by the French loyal to Charles VII. Number 1. Blanche of Castile, the Queen Mother who never left her son's side. Blanche of Castile was the wife of King Louis VIII of France and the mother of King Louis IX, later known as Saint Louis. When Louis VIII died in 1226, Louis IX was only 12 years old, and Blanche became regent of France. She was a woman of immense strength, piety, and political skill, successfully navigating numerous baronial revolts and challenges to her authority during her son's minority. She secured his throne and maintained the power of the Capetian monarchy. Even after Louis IX came of age, Blanche remained his closest advisor and a dominant influence in his life and government. In 1234, Louis IX married Margaret of Provence. Margaret was intelligent, pious, and came from a powerful family. Her sisters also married kings, including Henry III of England. However, from the very beginning of the marriage, Blanche made her presence overwhelmingly felt. Chroniclers like Jean de Joinville, who was a close companion of Louis IX, provide vivid accounts of Blanche's tight control over the young couple. Blanche was reported intensely possessive of her son and seemed to view Margaret as a rival for his affections and attention. She insisted on being a constant presence. It was said that Louis and Margaret were rarely allowed to be alone together. Blanche allegedly arranged their living quarters in the palace so that she could monitor their interactions. Joinville recounts that the king and queen often had to arrange to meet in secret on staircases or in corridors to have private conversations, as Blanche did not approve of them spending too much time together, especially if it seemed to be for pleasure rather than duty. Blanche's control extended to Margaret's household and her public role. She reportedly kept Margaret on a tight leash, limiting her influence and ensuring that she, Blanche, remained the preeminent female figure at court. There's a famous story where Louise was comforting Margaret, who was in distress, possibly after childbirth, or a difficult encounter with Blanche. Blanche discovered them together, and reportedly became very angry, berating Louis for neglecting his duties to spend time with his wife, and even physically tried to separate them. Margaret was said to have fainted from the shock and distress of the encounter. Blanche also ensured that Margaret was not given significant political responsibility. When Louis IX went on his first crusade in 1248, he appointed Blanche as regent of France again, even though Margaret accompanied him on the crusade. Margaret only began to exercise more agency and influence after Blanche's death in 1252. While Blanche's devotion to her son and her capable regencies were crucial for France, her relationship with her daughter-in-law Margaret was, by all accounts, extremely challenging for the younger queen, defined by the older queen's unyielding grip on her son.